Okay, and so if we think about matching chords with particular scales, we're usually going to start with thinking from the most simple perspective, being C major or a C minor chord. C major is the scale that directly connects to the C chord, or the C major chord. And from the same thought, if we take C minor, we're going to play a C minor scale. So for a C minor chord, we're going to play a C minor scale over that chord. Now, if we also think about a C diminished triad or a C augmented triad, we're basically going to need to know what the notes are in the scale, meaning does it have a flat 7, what else is going on in that chord besides the triad. So we start to think, if it's a diminished triad, well, does it have a flat 7 or a double flat 7, meaning it would be different between a half diminished 7 and a fully diminished 7. Same thing with an augmented, which is a sharp 5. So we just need to know more information about the chord to really understand how to play over diminished or augmented triads, because it depends on what's going on with the 7th in that chord. So if we take a look at the 5 main types of 7 chords in C, we would have C major 7. So basically all of these chords have scales that you can play over them, and not only one particular scale matches each chord. However, we have scales that we characterize with these chords that are the most common scales that we're going to play over these chords. So for example, over a major 7 chord, we're usually going to choose to play a Lydian scale. So for C major 7, we would have C Lydian as the scale that matches the chord. For C7 or C dominant 7, we're basically going to use a Mixolydian scale. Okay, so that is the 5th mode of major, Mixolydian. Okay, so you use that over dominant 7 chords. That's usually the first choice. It's basically a major scale with the flat 7, right? And then the Lydian scale comes from the 4th mode of major, so that's going to be our first choice over a major 7 chord usually. For a minor 7 chord, we're usually going to choose to play a Dorian scale, which is the 2nd mode of major. Okay, and for a C minor 7 flat 5 chord, we would choose to play a C Locrian scale, which is the 7th mode of major. Okay, and for C diminished 7, it gets a little more complicated. Basically what happens is you can play a symmetrical diminished scale, being the 2+1 scale, but that's not a modal scale, so what happens is we end up usually using the 7th mode of harmonic major or the 7th mode of harmonic minor, giving us either the Locrian double flat 7 or the altered dominant double flat 7 if you want to get real technical, but basically they're often called diminished scales, so we're going to talk more about that. I also have a video that's completely focused on the diminished 7 chord and how to play over that chord. Okay, and so for a major 7 chord, as we discussed, the main scale choice would be a Lydian scale. We could also choose to do a Lydian scale with a sharp 2, theoretically, which comes from one of the modes of harmonic minor. Okay, doesn't really affect the chord too much, but you can also do that alteration to the scale. And a common alteration that you'll see to the major 7 chord is a sharp 5. Okay? So the main scale that we play over that chord is a Lydian augmented scale, which comes from Melodic Minor. Okay? So it's basically a Lydian scale, a major scale with a sharp 4 and a sharp 5, which means augmented, right? So we can also play a Lydian augmented with a sharp 2. We could also do a harmonic major scale, because it has the flat 13, which also acts as the sharp 5. Basically, both of these scales are from the harmonic major. And then also Ionian augmented, which comes from harmonic minor, that scale can also work over this chord, okay? But very commonly, you'll see major 7 type chords played with some kind of Lydian scale. And if we have a minor major 7 chord, you can also write that as M-I-N, minor major 7, but usually I'll write, like say C minor major 7, I would just write C little m major 7. It's up to you how you want to write that. Basically the scale that works over that chord is the melodic minor. So that's kind of the main scale that people choose to play over a minor major 7 chord. However, you can do a harmonic minor scale over that chord. It's less common, but can be used. And then also a Lydian flat 3 would also work, because it's like a major 7 type chord with that flat 3, which makes it minor, basically. And for a dominant 7 chord, the main scale that you're going to play over that is a Mixolydian scale, 5th mode of major. If you're playing just a regular dominant 7 chord, the Mixolydian scale kind of works great with that. Okay, so we'll get into more detail about altered dominant chords with flat 5s, sharp 5s, flat 9s, sharp 9s, and that kind of stuff. And for the minor 7 chord, again, you could write this M-I-N-7 or -7 for minor. Imagine the C right here, or a letter. Basically, this means minor 7, okay? The scale that goes with that chord is a Dorian scale. Okay, so that's going to be our first choice. The 2nd mode of the major scale, right, is going to be Dorian. Now we can also take a mode from each of the different parent scales and get a mode that also works over a minor 7 chord. Okay? All of them still contain the chord tones of the minor 7, they just have some different notes in between. So we have Dorian Flat 2, which comes from the Melodic Minor. We have Dorian Sharp 4, which comes from the Harmonic Minor. And we also have Phrygian Flat 4, which comes from the Harmonic Major. And for a minor 7 flat 5 chord, or also a half diminished 7 chord, we are usually going to play a Locrian scale, 7th mode of major, right? Now we also get modes from the other parent scales that also work over a minor 7 flat 5 chord depending on the context. So from Melodic Minor we can choose Locrian Natural 2, from Harmonic Minor we can choose Locrian Natural 6, or from Harmonic Major we can choose Dorian Flat 5. All of those scales will also work over the minor 7 flat 5. Now one other thought is you could actually play an altered dominant scale over this chord, also known as the Super Locrian scale, but usually that chord is designated for altered dominant chords. So meaning a dominant 7th chord with flat 9, sharp 5, sharp 9, flat 5, flat 9, you know, all the different alterations that you can do in that chord. So usually when we're thinking of a minor 7 flat 5, these are the scales that we're thinking of from the modes. Okay, and then playing over a diminished 7 chord, basically the first choice I would think of is from the 7th mode of Harmonic Major, which is a Locrian double flat 7. So that's the closest scale to a minor 7 flat 5 chord, which would be a Locrian scale, but you have the double flat 7 in the scale, which gives you the 4th chord tone of that chord. So if you have a diminished 7 chord, they're all minor thirds. So it'll be 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. So you need that in the scale for it to make sense over a diminished 7 chord. However, I think of also what I call the Bebop diminished scale, which is the exact same scale as that, but you also add a flat 7 to it. So not only does it have the double flat 7, it also has a flat 7. So that means you don't have an augmented second interval from the last note of this scale back to the root, so you actually add one note, just like Bebop scales. So basically we just add the flat 7 to the Locrian double flat 7. It sounds confusing, but yeah, basically that's what we're going to do. So that's really the same scale, which is an added flat 7. Okay. Then also we could play the altered dominant double flat 7 scale, which comes from the Harmonic Minor mode, the 7th mode of Harmonic Minor. They also are just known as diminished scales, you know, but these are like the kind of more technical names of it. And then of course a lot of people really choose to play this symmetrical diminished scale, which is basically the 2+1 scale. So whole step, half step, and so on. So it's a non-modal scale, but it sounds great over the diminished 7 chord. So they all have different contexts, but I kind of prefer the Bebop diminished one. I think that one's cool because you get more notes, and it's also derived from the modal scale being the 7th mode of Harmonic Major. Okay, and on to the dominant 7 chords with extensions and alterations. So basically if we have a dominant 7 flat 9, well, there's a scale called the Mixolydian Flat 9, which goes right along with this chord. That actually comes from Harmonic Major. Now, if we take this chord and make it a flat 13, what's going to happen to our scale is it's simply going to be Mixolydian Flat 13, or Mixolydian Flat 6, basic same thing, right? And that scale comes from the Melodic Minor. And if we go back to calling it a dominant 7 flat 9, we can also play a mode from Harmonic Minor, which is a flat 9 and a flat 13 scale over here. So we would write that as Mixolydian Flat 9 and also flat 13. And another common chord you will see is a dominant 7 sharp 11, okay? Basically giving us a Lydian dominant scale, all right? So we could also play that same scale over a dominant 7 flat 5 chord, ideally. But the Lydian dominant kind of refers to the sharp 11 being that sharp 4. So this scale goes directly over that chord. And for a dominant 7 altered chord, the scale that's going to go with that is an altered dominant scale. Okay. So basically this chord can have a flat 5, sharp 5, flat 9, sharp 9, and any combination of those notes, this scale will hit all of those notes regardless. So this scale will hit the flat 9, the sharp 9, the flat 5, and the sharp 5. So no matter how you alter the dominant 7 chord with the notes we just mentioned, this scale is going to work perfectly over that. So this chord and scale is specific to the Melodic Minor. Okay, again, it's the 7th mode of Melodic Minor. So anytime you have an altered kind of dominant 7 chord, it's often a good choice to use this altered dominant scale. Basically just playing a Melodic Minor scale 1/2 step above the chord. And of course we have many different options as to which scales we want to play over chords, depending on the sound we're going for. But these are the ones that fit in the modes based on these chords and are usually the first choice that we're going to make. And of course we have other kinds of chords and other alterations of chords and all kinds of stuff that we can do with triads and combining different triads together and getting all kinds of polychords and stuff. But basically we just want to understand what kind of chords we're going to see most commonly first. And so basically just another consideration is, say we had a sixth chord, or specifically a minor sixth chord. So say we had minor six. So Dorian would be the first simple scale choice over a minor sixth chord, basically. If you're playing a major sixth, you can just play a major scale because it already has the natural sixth in it, But in this case, if you're thinking of a minor sixth chord, you have a minor triad with a natural sixth, so that works perfectly with the Dorian scale. So that's basically all there is to it. As long as we have the notes of the chord in the scale, the notes in between can be variable. But for the most part, I think it's really good to understand which scales are the ones that are the most common, that are kind of characteristic to those chords. And by having a good understanding of which scales we would normally play over these chords, then it makes more sense why we would choose some of these other options or alterations on these scales. But for the most part, we just want to kind of basically understand where it comes from with the modes. So if we're thinking all the modes of harmonic minor, melodic minor, harmonic major, all of that, we want to understand what these main modal scales are so we can identify the chords with these scales, and then we can make choices outside that later.